Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
The Bible isn't a book of rules or a book of heroes. The Bible is most of all a story. It's the adventure story about a young hero who comes from a far country to win back his lost treasure. It's a love story about a brave prince who leaves his palace, his throne, everything, to rescue the one he loves. It's like the most wonderful of fairy tales that has come true in real life. You see, the best thing about this story is, it's true. There are lots of stories in the Bible, but all of the stories are all telling one big story. The story of how God loves his children and comes to rescue them. It takes the whole Bible to tell this story, and at the center of the story there is a baby. Every story in the Bible whispers his name. He is like the missing piece in a puzzle, the piece that makes all other pieces fit together, and suddenly you can see a beautiful picture. And this is no ordinary baby. This is the child upon whom everything would depend. This is the child who would one day... but wait. Our story starts where all good stories must start, right at the very beginning.
Good morning, I am Linda Kraft, and this morning I'm reading from the Jesus Storybook Bible. In the beginning there was nothing to hear, nothing to feel, nothing to see, only emptiness and darkness and nothing but nothing. But God was there, and God had a wonderful plan. I'll take this emptiness, God said, and I'll fill it up. Out of the darkness, I'm going to make light, and out of the nothing, I'm going to make everything. Like a mommy bird flutters her wings over her eggs to help her babies hatch, God hovered over the deep, silent darkness. He was making life happen. God spoke. That's all. And whatever he said, it happened. God said, "Hello, light," and light shone into the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. "You're good," God said, and they were. Then God said, "Hello, sea, hello, sky," and a great space opened up wide and deep and high. "You're good," God said, and they were. Then God said, "Hello, land," and there, splashing up through the oceans, came cliffs, mountains, sandy beaches. "You're good," God said, and they were. "Hello, trees," God said. "Hello, grass and flowers," and everything everywhere burst into life. He made buds bud, shoots shoot, flowers flower. "You're good," God said, and they were. "Hello, stars," God said. "Hello, sun. Hello, moon." And whizzing into the darkness came fiery globes, spinning around and around, whirling orange and purple and golden planets. "You're good," God said, and they were. "Hello, birds," God said, and with a fluttering and flapping and chirping and singing, birds filled the skies. "Hello, fish," God said, and with a darting and dashing and wriggling and splashing, fish filled the seas. "You're good," God said, and they were. Then God said, "Hello, animals," and everyone came out to play. The earth was filled with noisy noises, growling and gobbling and snapping and snorting and happy skerfuffling. "You're good," God said, and they were. God saw all that he had made, and he loved them, and they were lovely because he loved them. But God saved the best for last. From the beginning, God had a shining dream in his heart. He would make people to share his forever happiness. They would be his children, and the world would be their perfect home. So God breathed life into Adam and Eve. When they opened their eyes, the first thing they ever saw was God's face. And when God saw them, he was like a new dad. "You look like me," he said. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever made." God loved them with all of his heart, and they were lovely because he loved them. And Adam and Eve joined in the song of the stars and the streams and the wind and the trees, the wonderful song of love to the one who made them. Their hearts were filled with happiness, and nothing ever made them sad or lonely or sick or afraid. God looked at everything he had made. Perfect, he said, and it was. But all the stars and the mountains and oceans and galaxies and everything were nothing compared to how much God loved his children. He would move heaven and earth to be near them. Always. Whatever happened, whatever it cost him, he would always love them. And so it was that the wonderful love story began.
Well, last night we had a church trivia night, and lots of families and all generations kind of joined in as we did some Disney trivia. I see some folks here today that were part of the trivia, and congratulations to Mason and Christina McCrill, who are here at the earlier service. They topped, they came in first place. I can give you 2 hints who came in last place. We were doing pretty good, but we got to the final question, and in true Cliff Clavin style, we bet it all on Final Jeopardy and lost everything. So partly to redeem myself, but also in case you missed the trivia, to give you a chance to be part of the fun, I have a little trivia question that we're going to start with today, except the topic is not Disney, the topic is literature and stories. So I'm going to read the first line of some famous stories, and I want you to see how many of these books or novels that you can name, okay? So, first one. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And I heard some people say it out loud. Don't give away the answers for everyone else. You want to prove that you're smarter. So just hold on to it. So anyways, that was the first. The second one. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Call me Ishmael. You better not tell nobody but God. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show. And lastly, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were very normal. Thank you very much. Okay, let's see how you did. So the answers, in order. We have them on the screen we can put up here. So the first one, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, was Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Happy families are all alike. Unhappy families are all unhappy in their own way. That is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. A bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. That ominous first sentence is 1984, beginning of George Orwell's classic. Call me Ishmael, Moby Dick. You better not tell nobody but God, The Color Purple. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life or whether someone else, that station be held by someone else, that's David Copperfield. And the last one, I thought, especially for our younger generation, they would know, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive, that is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Is there anyone who was 7 for 7? Just curious? No. See, I could have done it. I could have won if this was the topic. But I find it interesting. Did everyone get at least a handful of them? Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how just the first line, how a lot of times we recognize the story that is going to follow. Because authors and preachers put a lot of work into what the opening of a story is, especially that first line, because that's the hook, that grabs you. It may not give you tons of content, but it sets the stage, it sets the tone. If I start a story with "on a dark and stormy night," well, then you know it's going to be a scary story, or maybe like a murder mystery of some kind, right? But if I start the story with "a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away," you know it's going to be an epic sci-fi adventure, especially if I have John Williams music behind me, you know? Like, we know that's Star Wars. If I say, "sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip," then you probably know that's a 1960s comedy, and you'll have Gilligan's Isle running in your head the rest of the day. You're welcome for that. I'm just saying, like, it doesn't take a lot of information for us to begin filling in what the rest of the story is about. And if I begin a story, "once upon a time," there's something about those words that makes us lean forward and listen. If I say "one time in band camp," you do the exact opposite. But you know, the beginning of the story matters. And so in the most important story in the history of humankind, when it is told, how does it begin? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In just a handful of words, profound claims are made about God and about people and about the relationship between the two and about the meaning and purpose of life. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Walter Brueggemann, one of my favorite Old Testament professors, writes concerning this simple sentence. He says, all other philosophical and political questions, all issues of meaning and power, they are subordinated to this fundamental issue of the relation between creator and creation. Upon this issue, everything else hinges, including human authority, power, the reality of order and freedom in human life. It's all there. And in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, this story, we have to remember, was told from generation to generation. It was passed down for centuries as oral tradition. It would have been told around campfires or in community meetings, in worship services. It would have been told at bedtimes, to children and to grandchildren. But never was it kind of written down until the 6th century BC, scholars tell us. That's when it reached its present form. And what was happening in the 6th century in Israel's history? Well, that was when the people of Israel were rounded up and gathered and carted off into exile to live as slaves in a foreign country. And oppressed by those people, living, in the face of a dominant culture that tried to define who they were. They realized they needed to define their own self. They needed to define their own culture. They needed to write down their story. And this was the story they wrote. And so you have to understand that this story that we read at the beginning of the Bible, it's told in direct contrast and opposition to the stories that were present in the dominant culture, because Babylon had its own creation story as well. And Babylon's creation story went like this. In the beginning, there was Tiamat, the goddess of chaos and ocean deeps. And set against it all begins with a big battle between Tiamat and Marduk, who is the hero, the Babylonian god. And there's this epic showdown and a battle between them. And Marduk emerges victorious. But that's not the end of the story. That's actually where they begin. Josh McNall, in his book, Long Story Short, that we're kind of reading through this Lenten series, here's how he tells it. He says, in a gory fit of creativity, Marduk decides to make something from the remains of his slain foes. According to the Babylonians, he created the earth from the mangled scraps of Tiamat, and human beings from the bloody corpse of Kingu, her son. And somewhere out there, Quentin Tarantino pronounced, it was good. Because that's what it sounds like, right? A Quentin Tarantino book or a movie, where everything's gory and everyone dies in the end. But you have to understand, for the Babylonians, this story made sense. It was their way of understanding their world. It was their way of understanding their own divine purpose, that they thought they were commissioned by their God to conquer and subdue all the regions, all the peoples of Mesopotamia, and out of the scraps of their civilization to put together and create the world in their own image. That's what they were doing. And even though the Babylonians have, kind of passed away that empire, that civilization from the culture of the earth, their story still persists. We may not have the characters of Marduk and Tiamat, but we still have this thread that runs through our culture that says conflict leads to creation. Think about it. You got two people who work as business partners for a long period of time, and they build a successful company, but then at some point they have a disagreement between them about how the company should be run or about this product, this app that they're trying to bring to the market. And so the two get in such a heated argument that one splits off and forms his or her own company, and new products flood the market. There's creation, there's newness. And what does it come out of? Conflict. You could apply the same thing, McDowell says, to the way we tell our story as a country. Where did we come from? We came out of a conflict over taxes and teas. And out of this great conflict, out of this war, came a new nation. And forever the face of the earth has been different. You can do it with art. You can do it with sports. You can do it with music. You can do it even with science. This idea, this narrative that says, conflict can really lead to creation. It's kind of baked even into our creation story, because our culture has a story too that we tell about how life began, how we came to be here. And at the center of that story, we have this, we even have a sitcom about it, right? With a catchy theme song that goes math, science, history, unraveling the mystery, and it all started with a big bang. That's what it's about, the big bang. This idea that at the very beginning of time, there was a violent explosion that sent the galaxies spinning out into the universe. And even here on Earth, as life has evolved over the millennia, over the I don't even know what the right word is for billions of years. What's been the driving force? Conflict. Competition between the species, survival of the fittest. And this isn't, I'm not trying to denigrate or attack modern science or scientific thought. I do think there's space for both faith and science to coexist together, especially if we're kind of freed from having to read the Bible literally. But at the same time, we have to recognize the claims the Bible makes over and against the prevailing culture. It matters how we tell the story. And it especially matters how we begin the story of our origins. And here we have kind of these two opposite ends of the spectrum with the story of Babylon and the story of today. The story of Babylon on one end, it's mythology, right? And mythology says that all the meaning of life is found out there, away from earth and the realm of the gods. That's what really matters, and we live just to please the gods. But on the far end of the spectrum, you get the scientific. And when I say the scientific, I mean that philosophy of life that says there is no meaning, that we're all just products of random chance. We're just here by accident. And against these stories, the Bible makes some specific claims. And it says that we were not created out of conflict, and neither were we created out of random chance and probability, but instead we are created out of love. And we are created for loving community. That's the claim of Scripture. The very word creation, just that word creation, it carries incredible theological freight and meaning. Because the word creation implies that there has to be a subject in that sentence, a creator who creates creation. And even the word create, like Walter Brueggemann, he makes these wonderful distinctions between the verb create and the verb make, both of which are present in Genesis chapter 1. He says, but the word make has this utilitarian meaning to it. Like a factory worker or a craftsman making a chair, making an item that may serve a purpose, but it's just there. Versus the word create, it implies the giving of will, the giving of freedom, the giving of being to something outside yourself. That God doesn't just make the world, he creates. And look at the mode of creation. How does God create? It's a relationship. It's a dialogue between creation and creator. It's call and response. God speaks, and creation listens. God doesn't command, make it so, make it happen, creation. Instead, God gives permission. Let there be. And creation responds to his loving voice. I love the way, again, going back to Brueggemann, the way he says it. He says, the divine speech, or the sovereign speech, is not coercive, but instead evocative. It invites, but it does not compel. It hopes rather than requires. And thus it may be resisted and unheeded, but the call of the Creator is not thereby voided. God does not make so that the object is simply there. Rather, God creates by speaking in ways that will finally be heard. His word has the authority of suffering compassion. Creation then is not an object that is built by a carpenter, but rather creation is a vulnerable partner whose life is impacted by the voice of the one who cares for it in tender and firm ways. To me, that's a very different way of thinking about creation as a vulnerable partner that God calls into being. And the point is that God desires relationship with creation. We are created both by and for relationship. God doesn't just sit back and kind of say, let there be, or he's not a watchmaker who just sets the gears in motion and then lets it all unfold, but rather God is present in the processes of science, present in the processes of history, to continue to create, and once created, to call creation into relationship with himself. God desires for us to relate to him, and this is no more evident than when it gets to the pinnacle of the creation story, when God creates male and female, humankind in his own image. Let us make people in our own image. And then you get this kind of triplet of verses that kind of read like poetry. It's a liturgy. There's a repetition in them. So God created humankind in his own image. And the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. 3 times is that beautiful word, create. And twice, in his own image. And then once God creates people in his own image, what does he do? He speaks directly to them. For the first time among all of God's creative acts, he speaks, but he doesn't speak broadly to all of creation. Instead, he narrows in on a certain piece of creation. And he speaks directly to us. He says, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and every other living creature that moves upon the ground. He invites us into partnership with him. And then he says, I give you. This is the first time we see the word you in the biblical story. God speaks directly to us and says, you, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. You see, the claim of the Genesis story isn't just that God creates. It's rather that God speaks. And God specifically says, you. God calls us into relationship with him. And what kind of relationship does God desire with us? Well, it's right there in that verse, taking you right back. Because where we see you, there's the I, a subject, and you, the object. But what's the verb in that sentence? I give you. The relationship God desires to have with us is one of generosity and blessing, Blessing is woven all the way through the creation story. At the end of every day, what does God declare? It's good, it's good, it's good. Or I like the version that Linda Craft read, you're good, you are good, you are good. And he blesses, blesses, blesses. It's like a refrain when he creates fish, when he creates birds, when he creates people, he blesses. And not only does he bless all the way through the creative process, but when he reaches the end of creation, what does he do? He creates a whole day. For what purpose? Simply to bless it, to create space for us as his image bearers, for us as his partner people, to be able to rest and to look back on the work we have done with satisfaction and to rejoice in the goodness and the mercy and blessing of our Creator. God's desire all the way through is to bless, bless, bless. And what does he want in response? Well, the proper response of this blessing is praise. Is to respond in praise to our Creator. That's what creation does. Go through all of Scripture and you see how creation responds to its Creator. Jump to the book of Job. And when Job is describing how really it's God speaking to Job, describing the moment of creation, he says, even at that moment, when the foundations of the world were laid, the angels were shouting for joy, and the morning stars were singing together in chorus. In the book of Isaiah, the prophet declares that when we experience the salvation of God, when we see it with our own eyes, the mountains and the hills burst into chorus before us, and all the trees of the field clap their hands with joy. Psalm 19, the psalmist declares, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them, yet their voice goes out to all the earth, their words to the end of the world. Praise, praise, praise. That's how creation responds to its Creator. And we, God's image bearers, his partner people, are called to do no less. So it's not sweat and tears. It's not fear and punishment. It's not even command and obey. The relationship God wants with his creation, with us, is blessing and praise. That's what we are created for. Isn't that beautiful? Now we know that's not the way the story plays out. In the next chapter in Genesis, we see conflict start to enter the picture because humans choose something other than to rest in God's blessing and to return God's praise. We choose another pathway, and that plays itself out, and we're going to talk about that. But for right now, I just want us to remember that that's not the way the story begins. The story begins with good, good, good. Blessing, blessing, blessing. The story begins with a never-stopping, unending, unbreakable, always and forever love. And God will stay with creation. He will not abandon it or forsake it. He will stay with creation, inviting, calling, mending, until someday it responds in the way that he's always desired. In fact, the Bible declares that God so loved the world that he would give his only begotten Son. But that's later on in the story. We'll get to it. For right now, as we begin our season of Lent, as we go through this journey trying to cover the whole story of the Bible in 6 weeks, as we journey towards Easter, I just want you to reflect this week on the single question. How would you describe your relationship with God? What words would you choose? Are they command, obey? Is it fear and punishment? Is it guilt and pressure? Or is it blessing and praise? What would it look like to live a relationship of blessing and praise in response to your Creator? And there will be some of you today who says, I don't even know how to describe what words I would choose to describe my relationship with God right now. I'm not even sure I know how to relate to my Creator. And that's okay if you're in that space. I just want to invite you to open yourself to the possibility that just as surely as God at one point spoke and said, let there be light, let there be land, let there be sea, let there be animals, at some point in creation's history, God said, let there be Lee, and let there be Noah, and let there be Lynn, let there be you. And once he called you into being, he speaks and calls your name. He continues to say a divine you. Listen for that you. And if you're hearing, I condemn you, or I reject you, or you're not good enough, or anything of that sort, you are not hearing the voice of your Creator. Because the voice of God says, I give you, I bless you, I love you, I forgive you, I claim you as my child. And if we could really hear that divine you spoken to us, then what response is left for us except to respond, thou? How great thou art. I close with these words from Walter Brueggemann, who I hope is becoming a good friend of yours as he has been to me. He says, the good news found here in this story is that there are beginnings, new beginnings, even in the year 2021. These are not simply repetitions, moving pieces around or copying, but they are beginnings. And they are wrought by the speech of God, who evokes among us a new world. We have discerned this good news in Jesus of Nazareth, and through him, God's speech is still being spoken. God's powerful wind is still blowing. And here's the part I love. As God has spoken this word of blessing to us, so we may say it back to God. We listen to the story, but it doesn't stay in our ears. It leaps to our lips, and the proclamation becomes doxology. The story invites us to join the doxology of the throng in the throne room of this king, who will never coerce, but only invites, evokes, and hopes for creation. And then I looked, and I heard around the throne and the living creatures and the elders the voices of many angels, numbering myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands, saying, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. And I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all therein saying, to him who sits upon the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever. That's the end of the story, just as it was in the beginning. That's the long story made short. And my hope and prayer for you is that it might be your story, that it might be your song, both now and forevermore.